The winter session of Parliament has indeed begun. It's a crucial session that has many hopes riding on it, but it is equally saddled with plenty of skepticism. Will politics once again trump economy, and will reforms pay a price for the political standoff in Parliament? Or can lawmakers set aside political differences and do what we have chosen them to do, which is to legislate? The winter of hope or despair is upon us, and joining us on the show to analyze all of that is MJ Akbar of the BJP, Ajoy Kumar of the Congress Party, and of course Panda, who's all joining us right here. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being with us. It is a special session. Market participants, investors, both global and domestic, are keeping a very, very keen eye on the progress of the winter session and whether reforms will indeed pay a price for politics. So it's only fair we discuss the economy with the politicians who are right here on ET now. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being with us. MJ Akbar, you represent the ruling party, and it's only fair I begin with you. Realistically speaking, what are your expectations from the winter session, especially after the monsoon washout that we did see?
Well, on the very first day, there is the good news that we are doing what Parliament should be doing, which is debating. And, once the political parties, I believe, rediscover after the famous monsoon session that was drowned out, rediscover the power of debate, I hope that they will not succumb to the temptation of obstruction.
All right, they should not give in to the temptation of obstructing. And before I take it across to the opposition benches, Mr. Akbar, do you expect a galvanized opposition specifically after the Bihar debacle to obstruct more reforms? And does it also warrant the government to be a lot more conciliatory than it has been in the past?
Yeah, one of the sort of new myths that has been created is that the government doesn't reach out. And I'm sorry to hear this question, because it seems that you have at some level bought into this myth, into this canard. The finance minister, much of the legislation deals with the economic proposals. Let's take on the GST bill. Which Congress leader has he not spoken to on a one-to-one level? And then after that, you have one senior Congress leader, the vice president, saying that they have no conversations. How many conversations have actually happened? I'm sorry, but we must stress that the finance minister, Arun Jaitley, has reached out as much as is possible. And that is why actually there is now a visible sense that there is going to be forward movement. In the last session of Parliament, the Congress simply took a position of complete, and I would consider invalid, obstructionism as a political ploy. I hope that mood has passed. I hope that we can work together as a Parliament across the party lines, sort out our differences through debate, through discussion. Some of it may be even private discussions, and work out something that is extraordinarily important for the development of the country. The country cannot be held hostage to political partisan behavior.
All right, the country cannot be held hostage to political parlance in Parliament. And as a member of the main opposition, the Congress Party, Ajoy, let me ask you this question. Will we realistically see business transact? There is, of course, a very spirited opposition that has come into Parliament after the Bihar verdict that many people believe have only sharpened the divide.
No, I think, Supriya, the opposition are very responsible people, and I just would like you to remind you that the Bharatiya Janata Party suddenly is, preaching from the pulpit, forgetting what they did for a major part of the UPA 2 and a large part of UPA 1. So opposition is not going to object for the sake of opposing. I think there is a methodology in which bills are brought to the Parliament. There are lots of discussions happening. There is a lot of give and take, and that's the whole democratic process, because the various parties represent the various sentiments of the people. So I don't expect the opposition to oppose for the sake of opposing, but yes, if the government continues the arrogance Mr. Modi and his government continue to show on what the realities on the ground and what the feedback is coming from the people, and he continues not to engage with the opposition party, then you will have a significant amount of resistance. If they are ready to engage and hear the different points of view, I don't think there will be trouble.
All right. differences still remain, and I think the center of the difference is Prime Minister Modi himself. But Jay Panda, you are supposedly the neutral party between the Congress and the BJP, and let me ask you a very frank question. You've been in Parliament for years now. You were in Parliament today as well. Of course, the Rajya Sabha did get adjourned and the Lok Sabha did transact business on the Constitution Day. But do you believe Bihar has sharpened the political rhetoric really, and we will see a lot of political grandstanding on both sides? Do we expect any business worthwhile get transacted in this session of Parliament? Because there's just so much hope from this session. There's just so much of build-up to the winter session, really.
Well, Bihar was a big election, but it is one state election. And I hope it doesn't have a lasting impression by way of creating a schism so that the government and opposition are not talking to each other. I hope that that doesn't last. The word is, from what I've been hearing last couple of days and today in Central Hall, is that apparently the government has started reaching out and started speaking to senior members of the Congress and other opposition parties. I hope this is true, and perhaps this could have started earlier, but better late than never, because what is happening or what has happened in the last two sessions with Parliament being disrupted and blocked so much is not good for the country. It's time we put that behind us.
That's a fair point indeed. That's what we've also been picking up, that there's conciliatory note. And before I take it to Mr. Akbar to figure out if there is indeed conciliation or not, Ajoy Kumar, the session has begun on a conciliatory note. The Prime Minister just said that let's discuss and debate just before he went into the House. Will you respond to this note of conciliation by the ruling benches?
You know, the conciliatory, so what we're seeing it is a mode of, very often it seems to be on the TV channels. Like the Congress Vice President correctly said that as far as GST is concerned, nobody has reached out to us. But they keep saying that they have done it. So conciliatory is, Supriya, is not on TV channels and, on their own website and on the Twitter handle. I think conciliation happens when you sit across and, you discuss it threadbare. And we would request the government to demonstrate that sincerely and not to manage the perception that they are trying to be conciliatory.
All right, not manage perception on news channels, but sit across the table and perhaps behind the scenes and negotiate with you. But Jay Panda, you wrote in the Times of India today to reduce the powers of Rajya Sabha, which is perhaps blocking popular mandate. But don't you believe democracy functions with these balances? I mean, how would you expound upon that rather outrageous comment, if I may?
Well, there are two aspects here. One is a systemic problem, and the systemic problem is that our Rajya Sabha has perhaps the most powers of any second house of legislature which is indirectly elected. So it is comparable to the House of Lords, which used to have similar powers until 1911. But in 1911 and 1949 they amended it so that the upper house in the UK can only slow down legislation, it cannot permanently block it. Now those houses which can permanently block legislation in the second house are, for example, the US Senate, but they are not indirectly elected, they are directly elected. So basically, we have to have a debate that should we have so many checks against the popular mandate of the day. Of course, we need to have some checks and balances, but should it be a complete veto? Or should the second house only act as a brake so that the heat of the moment doesn't get carried away and proper consideration happens, but they cannot permanently block it. Maybe for a year or so they can slow down legislation. So this is systemic changes I have been talking about for last 10 years, and I wrote this article because only last month Italy has made a constitutional amendment with exactly the same thing, that the upper house can no longer block legislation. But the other aspect is not systemic. The other aspect is one of communication. Any government of the day has an obligation to try its best to run the House and run Parliament, and they should in any case always have communication with the opposition and reach out and try to find middle ground where they can have give and take and pass legislation. So if that has begun happening, I welcome it.
All right, talking about checks and balances and talking about the role that the Rajya Sabha needs to play, and just take a cue from your answer and Ajoy, your previous answer there. You said government should listen to the will of the people, but isn't the will of the people better reflected and represented by the Lok Sabha, which is directly elected, and that is where the BJP is an absolute majority? And don't you believe at one level the Rajya Sabha is undermining the popular will of the people by stalling decisions? I mean, going by your own argument, and of course the argument that Mr. Panda is making.
It's the argument is as specious as Mr. Jaitley's statement. I'm saying it happens both. First of all, we are not talking only about the Rajya Sabha, we are also talking about the Lok Sabha. And the Lok Sabha, you got 200 odd I mean, if you put at BJP and their allies are also not on board. So let's take BJP with 280 or 280 odd and other people. So there is a significant non-BJP members of parliament in the Lok Sabha who would like their issues and votes to be discussed. And those discussions are critical, and it will only help the government to come up with bills, with laws which are relevant. So I'm not only discussing Rajya Sabha, and you need to understand the will of the people is the states also are a will of the people, because irrespective of the indirect elections, the states are based on the MLAs who elect their Rajya Sabha members. So both the Lok Sabha, which is critical, which has got a lot of opposition voices there, and the danger with the Lok Sabha, with the bulldoze, with the Mr. Modi's government style is to bulldoze their way through will be detrimental to the country. So both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are critical, and he needs to listen to both in the Lok Sabha. The government has to listen to both in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha.
Let's really turn the focus to the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room really is the GST Constitution Amendment Bill. All eyes squarely focus on what will really be done there. Mr. Akbar, I want to bring this to you because you represent the Treasury benches. Given the position that the Congress party has taken on this matter, how much of accommodation is possible? Can a middle ground be reached between what the BJP wants and what the Congress is proposing?
Look, let us call it practical ground rather than middle ground. Legislation must be enforceable. Legislation must be rational. You cannot take an irrational position and then hope that some sort of middle ground is reached or compromise is reached between the irrational and the rational. That isn't how it works. And I think all political parties and sensible MPs understand that, because we are discussing the good of the country. We are discussing economic development. There's no point really passing legislation which neither the system nor the private, neither public sector nor the private sector nor the system would find doable. So I think given that point, I think there is a wide space for forward movement.
Mr. Kumar, there is some reason to believe that the government is willing to compromise on some of the demands that you've made. You've brought it down from 9 to about 3 regarding the GST. Will you be willing to walk that halfway, like Mr. Akbar is pointing out, as well? Or is this a stance that you're not going to budge from?
No. The question again is, Mr. Anand Sharma has earlier said it, the Congress has certain demands. We definitely believe that anything about 20% will be hugely disastrous for the country. Mr. Arun Jaitley 3 days back had said that some of our demands are preposterous. So that's not the best way to start a discussion. The fact is that if you have something beyond 20%, you've had even enlightened people on economic theories. In fact, the highest value GST tax in the world is somewhere around 16.5%. So we'll be breaching that, and 23 will be ridiculously high. We've said that it should not go beyond 20 under any condition. I think the finance minister and the government should listen to those perspectives. And just to remind, the world, the highest rate is 16.5%. So we are going much beyond that. So that's why we are requesting the government to have an open mind on those issues.
Mr. Akbar, let's get down to specifics, because this is really getting personal between the Congress and you at this stage. Will the government budge on the 1% additional levy that the Congress party is opposed to, and even certain sections of India Inc. are not in favor of that? And of course, the whole demand of the GST rate cap being in the bill itself, like Dr. Kumar is pointing out.
I see some difficulty, frankly, in this is my personal view, but I see some difficulty in accepting a constitutional amendment for what should be a flexible position in terms of tax rates. I can't really see turning that into a constitutional amendment situation to be very rational. On the other issues, there will be discussion, and I'm sure within discussion there will be agreement, and I hope even on this issue of the constitutional amendment, all political parties will get together and impress upon anyone holding out that let's do what is good for the nation, let's do what is good for the people. The people are really crying out for economic development. There is such a thirst and such an anger, particularly among the young. The young want jobs. They wanted them yesterday. They wanted them day before yesterday. Today is already too late, frankly. We can't keep on, delaying legislation and denying the young the opportunity to find a life.
Actually, one could say that about the GST. Today is perhaps too late for the GST. It's been in the works for 8 odd years now. But Jai Panda, let's talk about the specifics that we're talking about. And I know Mr. Akbar has not said it, but there is a tacit understanding that that 1% additional levy could perhaps go away. The contentious issue now seems to be the cap on the GST rate, which they want to be included in the Constitutional Amendment Bill. But won't that be tough if there's an emergency? How do you go back and keep amending the Constitution each time? Is that practical at all?
Well, I think there is some logic in the argument that you really should not be specifying rates of taxation in the Constitution. The Constitution is meant for much more fundamental principles. But since there is a concern that the rate can be too high for the present circumstances, perhaps another mechanism can be found where the government can give an assurance as to what is the cap for now without writing it into the Constitution. Now, my party, the BJD, believes that there ought to be a reasonable rate, not a too high rate, but also writing it into the Constitution is unheard of. So I think we have to be a little flexible on how it is done.
All right, so let's get the man who's objecting to the GST rate cap, and he wants that to be a part of the bill, and that's the Congress party being represented by Dr. Ajoy Kumar here. Dr. Kumar, it's impossible and perhaps a little too impractical to put a GST rate cap in the Constitutional Amendment Bill. If there's an emergency in Tamil Nadu and if there are floods in Punjab, you can't go and amend the Constitution each time. Will you still insist upon that GST rate cap being made a part of the Constitutional Amendment Bill?
Look, the English language, you see, the English language has got tremendous ability to ensure such contingencies are addressed. So in case there are such contingencies, saying that if there are certain contingencies, in the rarest of rare circumstances, defined by certain procedure, you can go about it. But the government, we are again saying that keep it below 20, and if you want to have certain kind of apprehensions, bring up with those for discussions, and there is adequate provisions to draft which will ensure such rarest of rare circumstances. So I don't understand why the government is so adamant on it. There is adequate opportunities in law to give that kind of what you call space for any government in the law itself. So there's been umpteen numbers of law. The BJP government is not the first government to come out with any kind of a constitutional amendment bill. So I believe definitely there is adequate. So cap it for normal normal circumstances at 20. And if you have discussed those provisions, the rarest of rare circumstances which you believe, and move on.
All right, that's a valid argument, and I'm sure, Mr. Akbar, you're going to find some favor with it, at least your colleagues in policy making will. But quick closing comments from each one of you. And Mr. Akbar, the fear really is that if the government fails to push through the GST in the winter session, that the message that really goes out is that the reform drive has been derailed, and this is just going to add to more headwind, not just for the Indian economy, but Indian corporates who've so far reported very, very weak earnings. Do you agree? And how do you think that can actually be mitigated?
I don't think so. I think the strength of the government will to carry on the reform process, to build the economy at many levels. You know, people are underestimating, for example, the strength with which the base of the economy is being created through what the Prime Minister has defined. You know, he made a very interesting remark which I'm afraid has not got the kind of traction, and I hope you will give it traction. When he was in America, when he said that we have to move away from the binary of the public sector and the private sector, and he talked about creating a third sector, the personal sector. And this personal sector is creating entrepreneurs at the base level through loans from the Mudra scheme, through the Jan Dhan Yojana, and small businesses that can be the basis and the backbone of a massively increased economy. The monies that are being going in through the Mudra scheme are going to create not only, you know, what might be called small employment units, but on a very, you know, harvesting on a very wide scale. They are going to increase purchasing power. That purchasing power is going to enter the market, and that market is going to create the more demand for goods. So we are actually increasing the purchasing power at the bottom of the pyramid. The Prime Minister is through his schemes. And in addition, taking the existing economy forward as fast as possible through reforms, through executive decisions, and through a comprehensive vision, which is and strategy to take India towards a double-digit growth economy. We are determined to get growth, because it's only through growth that you can get the resources as well as the ability to create jobs. You get the resources for social sector spending. You get the resources for creating a qualitative improvement in the life of people, of the life of the poorest. Growth is the only way to lift this country from the curse of deep poverty.
All right, they say growth is the only antidote to all our problems. But Mr. Panda, a quick closing comment from you. I know there is this fear that if the GST is stalled, people will think reforms in India have gone for a toss. But are we perhaps spinning our hopes way too much on the GST and on one legislation alone? After all, we've lived without the GST for 6 odd decades now. We've even clocked double-digit growth without this indirect tax reform. Do you believe too much is being made out of the GST?
Well, not having the GST in the winter session will indeed be quite a setback, because it is not just another reform. It is this, if you talk of big ticket reform, this is the biggest ticket item that is on the plate, and I think it ought to be done. But I agree with you that if GST does not get done, although it will send some negative signals, there are many other things that the government can do, and there are a lot of things that don't need legislation. Just a couple of weeks ago, they have had relaxations on FDI caps in several sectors. I would suggest that they can take up administrative reform, which many governments have considered and not gone through. There are things that the government can do which don't require legislation. And also don't forget, the composition of the Rajya Sabha will change in 2016 and also in 2018. So there is never a permanent setback, but I would much rather that we just make that, we are almost an inch away from having a settlement on GST, and it would be tragic if we can't clinch that during this session.
The Finance Minister keeps referring to it as the creeping acquisition of the upper house, but Ajoy Kumar, will let you have the last word, because it is your weight behind the GST which will perhaps see this as a reality. As authors of the GST, wouldn't you want this bill to finally go through? I mean, you piloted it in the past, you've had differences, because if this doesn't happen, we are perhaps going to pay a cost for it with a very dampened sentiment. As authors, wouldn't you want this to sail through?
Supriya, the greatest growth which has happened in this country is period of forget the 91-99 reforms, but from 2001 to 2011 was, whether it was Mr. Vajpayee or followed by Manmohan Singh ji's government, was the highest growth rate which we saw, at touching closer to 8% plus. So the fact is that at that time you didn't have the GST. At that time all this was not there. So again, as the what you call the propaganda managers of the government continues to harp on this, there is a lot of plumbing and a lot of development and a lot of governance issues which the government should do sitting in their offices instead of moving all across different parts of the world. I think the fundamental issue is the GST is an important bill. Yes, we definitely want it to come. We have such huge apprehensions because if it goes beyond 20, it has got a huge inflationary backlash. They need to consider that very seriously, and we are open to it. So the first question is, you had the highest growth between 2001 to 2011, and I'm also saying that there was a period of BJP government, there was a Congress government, and there was a lot of issues which were of developmental issues, which was investment issues, FDI issues which were resolved. The government continues to harp only on the GST, and the GST is a good bill. We are the authors of that bill, so we support it. We only say that listen to us, beyond 20 it will be extremely inflationary for the country, and you need to keep a watch on that, and that's our concern.
Why do I believe at the end of this discussion, after 30 odd minutes, that we are perhaps headed closer to the GST than we have ever been, and one big push and some reconciliation here and there will perhaps see this game-changing reform become a reality. We do hope the goodwill prevails on both sides of the Speaker, the Treasury benches and the opposition. But to all of you, Mr. Akbar, Mr. Panda and of course Dr. Kumar, thanks very, very much for being with us on the special edition where we discuss and debate the winter storm. Thank you very much indeed.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.